Hello, welcome to The Rundown. My name is Sunny Galt. I'm a messenger with United Network News. UNN is the official news channel for CARE, which stands for the Center for Amity and Restoration of Earth. And what UNN does is we get out the real news, okay? So there's a lot of information out there, if you haven't noticed. A lot of disinformation and a lot of misinformation, right? So a lot of people talking that really don't know what they're talking about. And then there's people purposely putting information out there to confuse people. Because for a long time, humanity has been in the dark about so many things, including who we are as humanity and what humanity is capable of, including our planet and the role our planet plays in the multiverse or the universe. The multiverse just includes all the different dimensions and layers and things like that. And we're here to kind of break all this down because there's so much happening right now. And this is such a crucial point in history. And Earth is front and center in all of that. And you will not find that information if you are just turning on your TV set or your radio. You're going to hear people talk about very minute things that really don't matter. But we are looking at the bigger picture here. Because again, incredible things are happening and you deserve to know what's going on your planet, right? And in your own communities and in countries around the world. So we have a newscast that is released through our online distribution platform, which is unitednetwork.tv. And our newscast comes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And so after the news comes out, I do this podcast. And this podcast gives you some highlights from the stories that we cover on the newscast. And we cover all sorts of things. We cover some local stories, which are brought to you through our field messengers, which are basically citizen journalists, people just like you. Don't have to have a journalism degree or anything like that. You just pick up your smartphone and you tell us what's happening in your community. And we get the truth, right? Because who knows better of what's happening in their community than people that live there and that really care about their community. So we have our field messengers. We also talk about the new Earth. And that may seem like a concept that's pretty far out there. You may be like, what's wrong with the Earth we have? Well, we love our planet no matter what. But our planet, like I said, is changing. And we are changing with it. At least most of us are. Hopefully you are too, if you're listening to this podcast. And we have to learn how to live in this new Earth. And that includes new abilities that humanity is going to have. It includes meeting up with other beings on this planet that have been here for a long time and new beings, not necessarily new beings, but beings that are coming to this planet from other places that haven't been able to do that because the frequency has been completely off and it's been a little too dark for them, right? So these are beings that are coming from the upper astral as opposed to the lower astral. The lower astral is where you would have seen all the creepy crawly, demony kind of creatures, right? That don't exist anymore. That's a whole other conversation. And we have a lot of help right now in creating this new Earth, which is really exciting. So we talk about that and restoration. We talk about regional stories. So what are stories that are happening now on our planet that you may be seeing in other forms, right? On other news sources. But we always take the perspective of something that's actually going to impact the people. And we also try to provide you with the real story behind it, because sometimes what's said in the headlines and whatever isn't exactly accurate. And sometimes you got to do a little digging to see what the story really is. So we try to shine some light on that. And then we have what we call our World Situation Report. And we bring Kimberly Gogan from the Office of the Guardian on. Kim is helping our planet and all of its inhabitants transition to the new Earth, okay? To the light. We have been living in a dark age for millions of years. We recently, very recently, came out of that. And we are now in a light age and in a light timeline. And much of what we talk about in the news is trying to inform not just people, but the people who think that they are running this planet right now, that things have changed. And wars and famine and plagues and all those things that used to make them money aren't going to make them money anymore. And it's an education process, right? And you may be wondering, well, how do you guys know? How do you know all this stuff? Well, we have access to the highest security clearance on the planet. Kim specifically does, okay? So we know things that secret military groups don't know, generals, military generals around the world don't know. And that gives us an advantage, I have to say. So as you're listening to today's episode, some of the information may be surprising to you. If someone sent you this and you're like, oh, okay, fine, I'll check this out. You might be surprised. There are going to be some things that you're going to be like, I have never heard that before. Well, stick with us because as you continue to listen, things are going to make more and more sense. I remember when I first started hearing this type of content and I was like, my head was going in a million different directions, but I stayed with it. And I also did my research too. Please don't accept anything that we say, whether it's on our newscast or this podcast, as fact. Like, do your own research. If we mention a specific group, go digging on the internet and see what you can come up with. We're not making this stuff up. We're the only news source that isn't making stuff up or taking orders from, the CIA or something like that to tell you whatever the mainstream narrative is, or even the alternative media narrative, because they're both narratives coming from 3-letter agencies, okay? Above all, please think critically. Ask questions. Trust your own discernment. We talk about discernment quite a bit. It is the ability to know, is something real or not? Is something true or is it false? And in the beginning, you may be a little wobbly. That's okay. Keep practicing it because it will get stronger and stronger. All right, here is the rundown for Wednesday, November 1st, 2023. All right, it's time for our Field Messenger reports. Like I said at the top of this episode, our field messengers are people just like you. I mentioned citizen journalists, but I don't even like throwing the word journalist in there because that implies that you have to have some sort of background in this or whatever, and that is not the case. Okay, what you do have to have is a sincere passion for where you live, the people there, and to want to get the word out, the truth out about what's happening. And as long as you have that, and most of us have these little devices we stick in our pockets or our purses called cell phones that really are their own little media contraption, right? You can record video and share it with people and do all that fun stuff. So just take that out and tell us your story. And that's what our field messengers did on today's news. If you want more information, before I get into the stories, if you want more information about how to become a field messenger, you can go to unitednetwork.news, and then in the main navigation for the website, you will see a section called Field Messengers, and you can look up, different types of reports that you can do and just learn more about the Field Messenger program, which, by the way, we have started a giveaway, which is really exciting. So not only are you creating amazing reports, based on wherever you live or travel to. You can do reports when you're traveling too. But you can also win some cool prizes. Okay, onward and upward with today's Field Messenger reports. We've got 3. The first one is from Sandy in Utah, and we called this regenerative gardening. And Sandy, it's a simple report, but it's a really nice report because she is reminding us that even if you don't have land that seems to be, well fertilized and really great for, growing things like a garden, that you can transform the land. And that's exactly what she did. So she showed us kind of a before, not necessarily a before and after, but she has this land, and one she didn't mess with. Okay, it was just kind of how it was naturally or, in that state. And then the other side was an area that she helped to bring back to life. Okay. And she did that through compost and wood chips and worm castings, things like that to regenerate this soil to make it into a productive garden. Took about 8 months to do, and she shows us the results. Now, here's the thing. Now, if you see the report, you'll know exactly what I'm about to say, and it'll, probably a little light bulb will go off. But when we think of gardens, our brains are kind of trained to think of either like beautiful flowers or amazing garden beds where the fruits and vegetables are, just ready to pick off the vine. Everything is like perfect, right? Like a Garden of Eden type situation. And what Sandy shows us really doesn't look like that. That was the first thing that really struck me about this report. Prior to me knowing what I know now about how food grows and that nature really knows what it's doing, and it's not always really beautiful, but it works. And that's what I was thinking when I was watching Sandy's report. I was like, most people would probably walk past this and think, oh, a bunch of weeds or something I need to knock down because, it's just kind of in its own, it's doing its own thing naturally. But there were so many amazing things growing. So, is that programming from us? It's like we think things have to look perfect, and that's not what nature is really showing us. So if you have a chance to check out that report, check it out because you might feel the same way too. It's like, oh yeah, some people may want to chop all that down, but there's some really good stuff in there. Why would you want to do that, right? All right, next story is from Susan in Sweden, and she goes mushroom picking, which is kind of scary because you never know what you're going to get. And you really, by the way, disclaimer, you really have to know what you're looking for when you are picking mushrooms. So please do not just go out and pick mushrooms. In this case, Susan knew exactly the type of mushroom that she wanted. And she was actually in an archipelago, which a group of islands near Sweden. And it looked like kind of this lush forest kind of area. And she was walking around. The mushrooms that she found, she had a bunch of different names for them. But the one that I picked out because it was the easiest to say was yellowfoot. So if you want to look that up, it's a type of mushroom and it's kind of a smaller and it has like this little funnel. And she picked a bunch of them and then she showed us how she prepares them. So she went literally from the forest to taking us inside her kitchen and, real simple recipe, if you will. She put them on a skillet or whatever to reduce the amount of water in them, added some, butter, salt and pepper, and that was pretty much it. I'm a big fan of mushrooms, so I was like, oh, maybe I should try that. That's amazing. If you haven't grown your own mushrooms, there's a place nearby where I live in Southern California. We actually went to this mushroom farm, and we got this huge, it just looked like a huge clump of dirt, honestly. And then we had to water it, and it was like a spray bottle. And within, it was like a week, I think, they had this amazing mushrooms coming out of it. It was the coolest thing. We had so many mushrooms we didn't know what to do with. We were giving them to neighbors and everything. So I love me some mushrooms. So thank you, Sweden. Thank you, Susan from Sweden, for sharing this story with us. And then our final story is from Rick in Arizona. And he has a story about, it's not about Halloween, but it has to do with the holiday a little bit because there was an event that took place near where he lives, and it involved hot air balloons, but they had their own little twist on it. They made this into a family-friendly event. There were 25 hot air balloons, and then the kids, I don't know, maybe some adults snuck in there as well, but the kids could go to the different balloons and trick or treat, which is kind of a cool spin on trick-or-treating. And Rick did an interview actually with a pilot, which I was like, a pilot? But yeah, I guess if you fly a hot air balloon, you're considered a pilot, about how we got into it. So it's an interesting story. It's not just about Halloween, because I know, a lot of people don't like to talk about Halloween, but it's more about hot air balloons and, having fun with the whole family. So it was very interesting. In our New Earth stories, we have an interview with Jai Hain, and we talked to him, I think it was a couple weeks ago, I brought him on the news to talk about frequency. So he is a quantum osteopath and frequency specialist, which sounds super official, right? He's a really nice guy. He's based out of the Netherlands. He has his own business. It's called School of Frequency, where he teaches people about frequency and different types of healings and things like that. And in this segment, he is telling us about and explaining different frequency terms, because we have been told, when it's true, like frequency is everywhere. It is everything. Everything has a frequency. And so it's really important to understand frequency so we understand this beautiful planet that we live on, right? It allows us to do incredible things like heal, communicate with people, just, anything and everything. And so it's important to understand kind of the setup when it comes to frequency, and understanding the terms are really important. So Jai talks about things like order versus chaos, something being magnetic versus electric. You've got sound frequencies. You've got light frequencies. They can be negatively charged or positively charged. You have self-organization when it comes to frequency, and then you have disturbance. And then the last one he talked about was longitudinal waves versus transverse waves. And so a lot of this had to do with things that were natural versus not natural. So for example, when it comes to self-organization and disturbance, self-organizing frequencies are ones that naturally just kind of come together and make sense. And then you have frequencies that are just kind of mumbo jumbo and disturb everything. So these would be like EMF frequencies that come from your cell phone or all your electronic devices. And Jai does a great job of explaining this and explaining why we need to know this and how it will help us understand frequency. And then we have a couple of stories. This first one I thought was great. So I think this was in the UK. Yes, a town in the UK called Gateshead is using they're using their abandoned coal mines as a renewable energy source. And they're having a lot of success doing this within their town. In fact, they are able to heat, I think they said 350 high-rise buildings, a whole gallery, a college, an industrial park, and a bunch of homes through this method. So let me kind of break this down. It's really interesting. So they have these abandoned coal mines, right? And the Earth's core actually warms the floodwaters in these abandoned tunnels that are part of these coal mines. And then they figured out a way to take the heated water from the mine and the tunnels, and they pump it into wherever it's going, right? So whatever building or home, gallery, college, whatever it is, they have found a way to do that. And then that heats all the interior spaces, and it also heats the area's water supply. And then the water, once it's done, is returned to the abandoned coal mine where it is heated up again. So that's the renewable side of it, right? It just kind of goes in a circle. So very interesting. It's totally working for them. The article didn't talk a lot about how you would apply this like on a mass scale. So I'm not sure if this is something that would just work for one town. But the idea of running stories like this is to get us into a different mindset. It's not that you have to go to your thermostat and turn it on and, not really know where your heat is coming from, right? We have to start thinking sustainably. We have to start thinking about things that are good for our environment, and not because climate change is going to come and ruin us, okay? Because that's not a real thing. But we still need to take care of our planet. If you don't know this yet, the Earth is a being unto itself. It has a soul. And so we have to take care of it, just like we would take care of anything else that had a soul, right? Any other organic being. Well, our planet is one of those too. So this isn't like a, kind of tree hugger moment. I never thought I would be saying some of the stuff that I say, because I used to be like, oh, tree huggers or whatever. I had no clue. When I was sleepy, before I woke up, I was a good little battery, just sleeping away and thought the government was amazing. I've learned so much, and that's one of it, is that, we have to take care of our planet. That is not just something for a t-shirt or, to just quote on Earth Day. It's a big deal. We have to do that wherever possible. And then our final story as part of the New Earth is about repurposing materials that come from homes. So, a lot of times when homes or even businesses or when buildings, when they get too old, they're just demolished, okay? Nothing is really salvaged. I mean, you take out the stuff from the inside that you want to keep, like, belongings and stuff like that. But there's not a lot of effort put into, breaking down the items and being able to use them in different ways. But a Minneapolis business, so Minneapolis, Minnesota in the U.S., they are making a living doing this. So this is their business. They take apart houses, they resell the material, which obviously reduces waste, and it also creates jobs. And it stops all this debris from going into these landfills. So you know how much waste goes into those landfills, right? And then you've got the pollutants that are there as well. It's a big mess. And what I loved about it, too, is they're not just doing this to help themselves, but they are thinking about the future with this because they have started to give presentations at local high schools to teach them about this, which is really ingenious because not only are they helping the planet in general by doing this and by getting people out of that hamster wheel mindset where, you just do this because this is the way we've always done it and you just keep going on that wheel, but really thinking outside of that proverbial box. But it's genius because they're also recruiting for their own business at the same time. So I really appreciate what they're doing. Again, just thinking about how are we doing XYZ in this planet? Is that the best way to do it? Are there other alternatives? And that's what these stories that are part of the New Earth are all about. Okay, let's cover some regional news. I had a bunch of stories in today's newscast that I wanted to go over, and I'm like, nope, I usually try to keep it to 3 stories. We're going to go past 3 stories today, but some of these I'm just going to touch on really briefly. So the first one is about a data breach in India, and the personal information went out for millions of citizens. In fact, it impacted 815 million medical records. So this information went out. It is now being listed for sale by an anonymous hacker on the dark web. That's never a good thing. Okay. As far as where the data came from, they're thinking it could be from the Indian Council of Medical Research. That is India's leading body for biomedical research. When you hear stuff like this, okay, medical information going out on the dark web, you have to stop and think for a second because odds are this is not just a random hack job, okay? Now, we don't know what happened with this particular data breach, but we know in the past, especially large corporations, people that have a lot to lose, we know that sometimes these hacks are done for nefarious purposes. For example, perhaps the company needed the money. Maybe they did it themselves. They hired a hacker to do whatever. Or maybe there was never really any hacker and someone just put it out on the dark web because the company needs money. Maybe they are doing this to cover something up. Okay, so maybe some information is going to come out in the future and they can be like, oh yeah, remember that data breach? Oh yeah, that was the reason for that. That's out of our hands, right? So we don't yet know what's going on with this story. We do know that the company is making it very clear that they get attacked a lot. In fact, they claim that there were 6,000 hacking attempts so far, or actually from last year, 6,000 hacking attempts from last year. That's a lot of hacking. So when I see something like that, I think, oh, so you're patting yourself on the back. So, it's like, yeah, this time one got through, but hey, 6,000 of them, we were able to avoid those, these are the things that you got to look for in these stories, okay? So that's the data breach in India. The next 2 stories, I'm going to run through these pretty quickly because these are a little bit more uplifting. There's not as much to say, but I still wanted to bring it to your guys' attention. In Japan, some childcare laws have changed to allow fathers to have more flexibility for paternity leave, which I think is a beautiful thing. Mothers should have it too, but a lot of times fathers get, left out. And so I think this is amazing. It's giving them more flexibility within the child's first 2 months of life. So not an extremely long period of time, but hey, we've baby steps, pun intended, baby steps here, okay? And what they're saying is this could actually help. So apparently there is a population crisis in Japan. And they think that this childcare law is really going to help because studies have shown that couples are more likely to have a second child if the father is involved in housework or childcare. Now, I just metaphorically heard a bunch of women say, hallelujah. No. Is that how I got 4 kids? My husband's super involved in housework and childcare. No, I'm just kidding. So, that's a great story, right? We need to be supporting mothers and fathers as well. And the next story is kind of related. It's about kids and Japan. So I kind of felt like the stories went hand in hand. There are toddlers in Japan that are visiting elderly patients in nursing homes. They're basically creating a program, if you will, out of this. And it's going over really well. They call the toddlers baby workers, which I thought was really funny. And the people say this just brings new life into the facility. You know how it is when you see a new baby? Toddlers aren't exactly new, but still there's an innocence about them. Most people, it just puts a smile on their face. Sometimes they do funny stuff. And, I'm sure the elderly people just get a kick out of seeing, newer children, newer humans, walking through their doors. And I thought this was really great too. So the article talked about the toddlers don't have to speak because many of the elderly aren't able to speak either. And it just goes to show there's so many different ways we can communicate with each other. It does not have to be through words. In fact, that's probably the least informative way of communicating is through words because our words get misconstrued all the time. So I thought this was just a beautiful picture. I have this picture in my head of like a toddler just sitting there with an elderly person. Nobody's saying a word, but, maybe they're doing some gestures, hand gestures, or I don't know. I just think it's a really pretty picture. The toddlers do get something out of this besides, connecting with the elderly people. They get some sort of treat and some charms or I don't know, some little things that, toddlers would like. And then, the elderly people are allowed to impart some of their wisdom too, onto the children. They are toddlers, but at the same time, I think this is a really beautiful picture of whole communities coming together. It's more tribal is, what I say, the saying, it takes a village. It really does. It should because there's so much valuable knowledge that we can get from just appreciating one another and learning from each other. Okay, so more news here, more regional news. We got 2 more stories I wanted to go over. So climate change, let's talk about this for a second. And I mentioned this just brief in passing earlier in this episode. Climate change is not a thing, okay? I'm sorry to say it's not a thing. But there's a lot of people out there because of the job the media has done. The media creates all this fear around it. Of course, they keep changing the years. It's like, next year everyone's going to die. And then next year comes as, in 5 years everyone's going to die, right? And then they delete their tweets that says, the first time everyone was going to die. So we know there's a lot of fear. And they're trying to use that fear to get people to do what they want to do. And part of that is donating, right? Well, what we're finding, and this is what the story is about, is that pledges for climate change activities or organizations, there is a lack of transparency and accountability as to how this money is actually being spent. I know you guys are super surprised about that, right? Because when you're doing things legitly, you do not care if there is transparency. But if you aren't, and if you are using the money for purposes that have nothing to do with helping fight climate change, so-called climate change, well, then we got a problem, right? So this is all about what is considered climate finance. And those are the terms that they use, climate finance, because they are using these funds to like build airports and hotels and stores to back films, which I thought was really interesting, and not necessarily films about climate change. So the moral of the story here is that if you're going to donate your money, know where your money is going, because, you know, even if you really believed in climate change, the money is not going where you think it's going. It's going wherever the heck they want it to go because the rules are so lax. All right. Kind of on the same, climate change, help the environment kind of kick here. We're going to talk a little bit about the cost of electric vehicles. This is our final story. So another study is showing that owning electric vehicles without the government subsidies, because there have been a ton of, discounts and, tax things that you can do in order to save money if you own an electric vehicle. But if you don't have that, then owning an electric vehicle could be very costly. And what they found is that over 10 years, which I'm not sure really why they picked 10 years, maybe that's how long most people keep their cars. I'm not sure. But the cost of owning an electric vehicle is around $11,800 for the first 10 years. And the reason for that cost is due to the strain that it puts on the power grid for charging the electrical vehicles. And we've talked about this on the news. People forget that part. It's like, oh, yes, it runs on electric as opposed to gas. But what about the power grid? Because the manufacturers and the people that are really pushing this agenda, I think, what is it, Agenda 2030, or they keep changing the dates on this. But by a certain date, they wanted, X amount of cars, like a huge number, like 80% of cars or something like that should be electric vehicles. There is no way that that's ever going to happen. We do not have the infrastructure for it, period. And, prices are going up in, every area. And now you're telling me I've got to spend more money, and it's also taxing on the power grid. A lot of this does not make any sense. Now, for the people that are getting those subsidies, those owners are getting about $9,000. Oh, and it's spread out over 10 years, by the way, from state and federal subsidies. Obviously, that number fluctuates a little bit. But if you didn't have that, and, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but I know they did this with solar power. It was like for X amount of years, there were a ton of subsidies for it. And then you got less and less and less. So you get more people on it. And then you have more people wanting to do it because there's that whole, everybody's doing it, right? So you have more people wanting to do whatever it is. And then, oopsie, subsidies are gone. So now you have to pay out of pocket, right? Why would they get rid of the incentives to do it? If it truly is that good for the environment, somehow I think there's another agenda here. I know they don't do that. Wink, wink, nod, nod. So what we have happening here is more people are going for hybrid vehicles. So it's a combination of gas and electric powered. So we'll see where that goes. Not a huge fan of electric vehicles for numerous reasons. I think there are better ways. I mean, I'm ready. I'm ready for the day where we don't even use cars. I just want to transport somewhere. And now for the World Situation Report with Kimberly Gogan from the Office of the Guardian. So we had something happen last night, kind of transitioning into today at 12 a.m. or midnight. A very old contract expired. This was a contract that was renewed every 75 years. And it did some really important things, and it really changes the game as far as these people that think that they're ruling the planet right now. And, we're trying to inform people and get people to work for, the restoration of the planet as opposed to burning everything down and starting all of these wars. Well, something really important happened last night, and it was this contract expiring. I'm going to let Kim tell you more about it.
Last night at midnight, it was a very momentous day for the planet. In many different ways. So we're going to talk about it. So at the beginning of the Dark Age, one of the first things that happened is there was an agreement between lower astral races and us here on Earth, and then the upper astral races, that this would become the gateway planet for access and entry going in both directions, because that's the way it was supposed to be. Now, this treaty had been violated many, many times over the years, and it was very, very old. It's about 3 billion or so years old. So now, how does that translate into our day-to-day world? Okay, number one, we are officially not a gateway planet because there's nothing to gateway to down there anymore.
Right.
So that's good for our planet, and it's good for all of us that happen to live here. The next thing is this agreement had some stipulations added into it. Okay, number one, the agreement renewed every 75 years. So this would take us back to 1948 and all of those things that happened in 1948.
Right.
It is also the base root agreement 75 years ago to form the corporate government. So we all know that we have corporate governments and we have governments. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're kind of been one and the same, and it all roads led right up to Crown Corporation, which led us all to Rothschild. Mm-hmm. Next, the reason why it was the Rothschild family, or the Order of the Dragon in this case, is because 3,000 years ago, they were appointed the guardians of Earth. Now, they did a horrible job, obviously. They joined with the other side long before, many, many, many years ago, long before the people that live today. And they became more of a, pay to play kind of group. Mm-hmm. You can come in the door, how much are you going to pay us? And, it's corruption at the highest level on planet Earth. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Now, because that agreement for them to be guardian expired a while ago, several years ago, when it came up for a renewal last night, then there was no actual renewal, because it would have been me that would have had to renew this agreement, and it would have been under my terms and conditions at this point, but it did not renew. Now, take it one step further. This is also the reason why, if you're watching this and you work or have worked for a military or an intelligence agency, you reported directly to those families. It also was the beginning of the agreement with the Order of the Black Sun and planetary gateway security. Now, the first gateway or pillar, or one of those big elevators that goes all the way down, and I mean all the way down, on Earth, was actually in Israel. And it was under Tel Aviv, the place we now call Tel Aviv, because we didn't call it that when it was established. But it was in that location. And that is why the Gatekeeper program was actually put there. Making sense?
Is that also why, they created, Tel Aviv as we know it is the capital, right? So is that why that they made this large city right there too?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And it is also the reason for the plan that they had and the plan they intended on renewing last night, which is the Greater Israel Plan. Oh. So the Greater Israel Plan is what Netanyahu was actually talking about during his speech at the UN General Assembly, to whereby Israel would have basically expanded throughout the Middle East and the war that you're seeing there now.
Let me ask you this, Ken. Why is it so important that Israel expands? Like, what is it about that is so important to these people?
Well, there's a reason why the name actually translates into Israel, which means there is no God. Or Ra is God, which is in a lower astral. That's basically your anti-source.
Okay.
And the gateway would have expanded to other gateways in the region, such as the ones in Iraq we've talked about fairly extensively, the one in Iran, and was something else in Saudi Arabia underneath what we call Mecca. So there was a lot of different gateways that they thought that they were going to be under complete control over by last night.
I see. Okay.
Now, did they tell Mossad this? Probably not. Did they tell the rest of the people in Israel this? Probably not. Did they tell anybody in the US this? Probably not. Because what they don't want you to know, which it's too late now because all of those agreements have been sent out, is that governments around the world no longer report to or owned by Crown Corporation as of last night. Next, in place of that old treaty, a peace treaty was filed, which came directly from source. It was a declaration, another declaration, and it was for peace on earth.
Wow.
So we are no longer in wartime. We are no longer requiring gateway security. We don't need that anymore. So now everybody that works for all of these militaries and agencies are actually independent of Rothschild.
Now, this is really important. If you've been listening to our news, you know we do talk about the Rothschilds a lot, and it is a family, although now we're kind of talking about extended family, not just the original Rothschilds, who were huge banksters across the world. But a lot of the operatives that would carry out orders from the Rothschilds. And the Rothschilds had what I would call a lot of street cred, because they were able, in the past, when we were in a dark age, they were able to get money for these big plans that they had. Not just them, the orders always came from on high. On high, I'm talking about like horrible lower astral beings and other people that were ruling the planet at the time. But that time is over. Right? And these are the people that can't quite understand why, they did all the stuff they did in Ukraine starting wars. Now they're in Israel and in Palestine starting wars. And in the past, wars have made money. They would do these dastardly deeds and they would get paid for it. But nobody's getting paid for it now. And so Rothschilds, or the group known as the Rothschilds, are making all these promises to these different groups of people and trying to keep the war in Israel going. And nothing is happening. Their little lower astral being family members, of which they're probably hybrids of, are not coming to save them. And they keep thinking that, we just have to do this, or we got to wait for this alignment, or we have to wait for this eclipse to happen. It's just not happening. But the operatives were the people that would carry out these orders. And we have talked about them on the news before, because if we can switch the mind shift of the operatives, we can get the operatives to work for the restoration of the planet, because there's a lot of security that is needed and help that we need and expertise that they have. Now, have they done bad things in the past? Yes, they have. However, as Kim points out, they had really bad management. Have you ever worked for a company or a business that had really bad management? Like, that's not on you, That's really the people that are running it. And so what's happening now is the operatives are seeing that the Rothschilds are not in charge anymore, which now, according to Kim, this declaration has been made by source, by God, that we are now in a peacetime, which means the operatives don't have to report to Rothschilds anymore. That is really big. So then the question becomes, well, what are the operatives going to do?
Last night, it was a very angry conversation with operatives worldwide, I have to say. They don't know why they're not getting paid. But the one thing that did happen as well is we were at about 30% the other day, 30% not cooperating with us. They didn't want to move forward. They wanted to keep things the way they were. They wanted to still report to Rothschild, either directly or indirectly, whether they knew it or not. And some of these revelations happened, I believe, because we don't have an umbrella military corporation anymore. No.
They're all gone.
Yep. Also a corporate, isn't it? That was one of the corporations formed as the secret space program. So technically, all the other ones don't really have a home right now either.
Okay.
They can continue to take orders from Rothschild, continue to do things, but there's no money coming. There's no funding for that program. There's no agreement with the Rothschilds anymore. There's no gateway security required which is what their job actually used to be. It wasn't running the Trump Corporation or any of those people. The gateway security was the original reason why those organizations were founded. Mm. And originally under a different guardianship even, than the Rothschild family at the time. So a lot has changed in the last 24 hours, and it's a lot for everybody to absorb. But the one thing I will tell you, and I've told you from the beginning, and I've told everybody else from the beginning, is the Rothschilds are not in power. Mm-hmm. They haven't been guardian for a long time. I knew this agreement was never going to be renewed, so we just had to wait it out until everybody else figured it out. Now, as of this morning, cooler heads prevailed in the operative section. Now we have about 2 to 3% that are still holding out for the fantasy and the dream that Rothschild had promised them. Whatever that dream was, who knows? Probably bazillions of dollars to kill as many people on Earth as you can. The World Economic Forum ID 2020 program and all the other things they wanted to do that they had submitted for the 75-year plan. But alas, everybody else is going to go in another direction, so it seems. As of this moment, we've already been contacted by Langley, who wants to sit down and negotiate.
Is that a first time, Kim? First time that's happened?
I've had a lot of people say they want to do a lot of things. I really have. So this time I basically said, they actually called Tom, which they always call Tom Melville. Yep. And Tom basically told them they have 12 hours to figure it out, or we're going forward in another direction. We've also had, part of the reason for that is we've also had lots of groups come to the party, operative groups since the call last night, and they all want to join the GIA.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
It is great. And, we are still going to need, and I know everybody's going to say, oh, that's Langley, that's this, that, they're bad people. They have bad management. That's what they have. They had bad management. At the highest level, they were given orders and instructions to do specific things for which hundreds of millions of dollars came flooding out years ago. It hasn't happened in a long, long time, but that's what used to happen. There would be some conditions, obviously, and one step off the reservation, and, you're no longer here. That's kind of how it works now. So as long as everybody stays on the reservation, we have to create, that's what it's called in the world of operatives. And, if you go outside of orders, then you've gone off the reservation. So just to explain.
And that's their whole world, is taking orders and stuff. I mean, that's how they live. So, yeah.
Yeah. But we have a planet to secure, from crazy people, just humans now. So that's good. And eventually that's going to lead us into new security programs and new security protocols, because they have to understand that planetary defense, which is what they're wanting to do, is going to require you to actually be able to defend something. Now, with your little guns and your big, little rocket launchers and all that, that could kill some people. Sure. But eventually they're going to need to have different ways of getting around, let's just say, different ways of traveling, different ways of getting into our orbit, into the Kuiper Belt, into different locations, like that. We're going to have new technologies, and these people can either participate or not. We're hoping you do, because we are on the surface of this planet. We are already having people come in and out, and none of these people have maleficent intentions of trying to do anything bad. They're not from the lower astral, they're from the upper astral, different densities, different dimensions. And, we are going to need some kind of customs and borders patrol when we finally start trading, and a lot of other things. We have a lot of stuff here that is, I would say it's probably been hidden, and we don't see the value in it.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Tom gave them the deadline for 12 hours. So we'll see. Obviously, we'll get an update from Kim on Friday as to what their decision is. Again, the reason for wanting to work with operatives is not that everybody is squeaky clean, but if you don't have to start from scratch and you can work with people that have the experience to make things go much smoother and allow, because we all want restoration. If you are listening to this episode, it's either because you want to know what the light side is doing because you're on the dark side, or it's because you want the things that we are talking about. And so don't we want to do that as quickly as possible? Yes, we need to be careful. But like Kim said, there are going to be rules in place. You mess up, it's not just that you get fired. You go back to source. You go back to the creator, which means you no longer exist on this planet. Okay? And like I said, the comment that I made when talking with Kim, like these orders or whenever they're given orders, they respond to orders. Like these are order takers. That is their job. That is what they know. That is how they communicate. That's how they live. And so whoever they're working for, they take orders and then they do what they're supposed to do. And like I said, they fall out of line. They decide they want to, take some orders from Rothschild again or whatever. They're gone. So again, let's see what happens over the next 12 hours. We all want restoration to happen as quickly as possible. Yes, we need to be safe with this. We need to be smart with this. But this can really help us out and get to where we want to go as quickly and safely as possible. Okay, so there you go, guys. That's the World Situation Report. Again, do your own research. We did some name dropping today of different groups. Research those. See what you can find. Go down some rabbit holes. Learn about them a little bit more and how they operate. Keep asking questions. Think critically. And if you like today's podcast, please share this episode or the entire podcast with someone that you care about, because we need as many people working on the restoration of our planet as possible. If you want more information about us and what we do, you can go to unitednetwork.tv. If you sign up for a membership, that gives you access to all UNN newscasts, our complete World Situation Report with Kim. And many times that report's an hour and a half or so long. I'm just giving you guys small clips in our podcast today. And we also do original series too. So again, all of that's at unitednetwork.tv. You can also connect with us on Telegram. And the easiest way to do that is to go to our news website where we post our news articles at unitednetwork.news/connect. And it has all of our Telegram links and links to other sites and things like that. That are all part of our group. So I really appreciate you guys checking in today and listening to what we did on today's newscast. And thanks for being here. This is The Rundown. I'm Sunny Galt for United Network News, signing off.